black family from Harlem torn apart by a tragic event. Blue is a revolutionary contemporary opera about racism and police violence in the United States, but also a piece that centers around family life and community. I'm Isabel Sheridan, your moderator tonight, and welcome to Behind the Libretto, Blue, brought to you by the Bali and the Nationale Opera en Ballet. Tonight we are not only going to talk about some of the key themes within this beautiful piece, but also about the opera world itself. How inclusive and accessible is the opera world for people of color? And to what extent is there space for a political message within opera? Obviously, I'm not going to do that by myself. With me tonight, my first guest here is worldwide renowned American-based Kenneth Kellogg. Welcome.
Thank you.
Who plays the black man in blue in the opera Blue. And we are also joined, I hope, by director Tazewell Thompson, live from Harlem, New York. Give them a big hand of applause. Do we already have Tazewell on Zoom? That's always a tricky thing, but it's definitely worth it. Maybe, whilst we get the technical side figured out, Kenneth, I would like to start with you.
Of course.
How did you get into opera? It's a very simple question, but I think a vital one.
It's not so simple question for someone like me, who opera wasn't a part of my household. It wasn't part of how I grew up. I loved music as a kid. My family loved music, but
what kind of music?
Oh, R&B, hip hop, gospel, not opera, definitely. Yeah. I went to the public school system, and I had amazing educators. We had music in the public schools in D.C., and my first elementary school teacher, Carolyn Glover, she loved music more than anything. So she infused this love of music into her students, and I really attached on to not music itself, but to the feeling that it gave me.
When you were singing?
When I was singing, yeah. When I was singing or playing piano or just being around her making music. And, it just stayed with me throughout my adolescent life. So I played sports, I played instruments, but music was that thing that kept my attention most.
And what was it specifically about opera? Because you talk about music in a very general sense, but what was it about opera specifically that really, made you fall in love?
The love for opera didn't come until later. Because I hadn't learned about opera as a kid. It was just music. So what I discovered about opera was this. I talk about it as a culmination of every art form for me. I'm a visual artist. I'm not a great dancer, but I love to dance. You have acting, you have, the visual elements, the set design, craft. So for me, opera is the ultimate art form, and it includes every single other individual art form. So that in itself endeared me to the craft of opera. And singing for me, it challenges me to grow like nothing else. It's different every day. I have to be in tune with my body. I have to be in tune with my mind. And I don't know, it's hard to describe love.
It always is. Believe me.
It's kind of like that for opera for me. Like it's an all-encompassing thing for my being.
And you already when you started telling me this, you said it wasn't maybe the most obvious choice for you. I was just wondering, how many other people of color or black people did you see around when you were studying opera?
So I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I went to a performing arts school, high school. So we started studying classical music there, and it was predominantly black. So that was my basis of learning classical music. So everyone for me was black in the arts until I got to college and realized that maybe there were one or two of us who were actually pursuing it as a career. So my mind switched to, okay, I may be the only one in the room, but I still have the talent, I still have the drive, I still have the passion for this art form that there aren't a lot of people that look like me, but I'm still very capable of pursuing and doing this art form.
And how was that I guess being unique for you? Was that more strength, or was that sometimes also difficult?
I mean, it's for me. It's a difficult question because I never looked outside of myself for the art. It was always an internal thing. It was always how about it made me feel as a person. So the fact that I was the only black person in the room didn't really matter to me because I love the art that much. And I mean, there are times where race comes up or issues come up, but I always go back to that love for the art form.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. I was wondering, is Tazewell with us? Yay! Welcome. Do we have sound for him? Can we hear him?
Can you hear me?
We can. Welcome, Tazewell. Thank you for joining us. I don't know if you followed the first part of the conversation. But I just
did.
asked. Then you know that I asked Kenneth how he how his journey into opera started, and I was going to ask the same thing to you.
Oh, it's such a long story.
We've got time.
Sister Benvenuto.
No, it's epic. I'll abbreviate it, but keeping the good parts, I guess.
Good.
I was introduced to opera when I was a very young child. I grew up in a convent that I lived in for close to 8 years in upstate New York, Blauvelt, Rockland County. And I was sent there because I was taken away from my parents and made a ward of the state. That's an expression that I don't even think exists anymore. It's right out of a Charles Dickens book. And I was taken away because my mother and father, though independently of each other, were wonderful individuals, but they should have never been parents. They should have never gotten together and brought a child into the world, brought 2 children into the world as it was. Their criminal behavior led to the death of my little brother, who was killed in a fire that I was rescued from.
Wow.
So that led to then, with all the other background in their records that they have, I was taken away from them and I was placed in this convent that was run by Dominican nuns, the mother house of Dominican nuns in the world, called St. Dominic's Convent. And it was a huge compound. On one side of it were young women who came to the convent to become nuns. And it's a 3-year term. While I was this child, every Tuesday and Thursday, Sister Benvenuta, my music teacher, would come in and she would teach music. And this was an opportunity for everyone in class to fall asleep, but I was gripped by the stories that she would tell, and she would place the needle down on the record, and we would hear these selections. Now, a background of Sister Benvenuta is important to the story. When she was a young lady in high school, she told her mother and father that she was going to become a nun, that she had a calling. And her mother and father said, absolutely not. You can become a nurse, you can become a teacher, you can become a secretary. Even better, you can become a mother and give us grandchildren.
Noble task.
So she decided she was not going to do that. So at the end of her graduation, there was a high school graduation, there was a reception, and she was nowhere to be found. They looked, they searched, they went home, she wasn't there. She had left a note, but they hadn't found it. And it wasn't until the next day, and in those days when you tell, the police that I want to report a missing person, they wait a lot longer. It's changed now. Anyway, she ran away to St. Dominic's to become a nun. And once you enter into that seminary, that chapel, that church, you have that covered. Someone can't come up and say, you're not going to become a nun. She's there. Also, they didn't know where to find her. So
Conveniently.
she never forgot her love of opera, so she taught opera. You know, with everything else about teaching music, I learned how to read music when I was 9 years old.
Wow. That's
I
young.
learned Latin, how to read and write because I was an altar boy at 10 years old.
Wow.
And so when so years later, when opera came into my life, after I had been an actor and a teacher, and then started to direct plays, and then opera opportunities came to me to direct, there was Sister Benvenuta flying over my head as inspiration.
Wow.
And it recalled to me how much I loved the stories of opera. While I was at St. Dominic's, I, besides being introduced to all of these wonderful operas by dead white men, she also saw that, something has to be given to me outside of the class that will connect me to my culture. So I would see her during my lunch period twice a week, and she would play selections sung by Paul Robeson and Leontine Price, and introduce me to Treemonisha, introduce me to wonderful music that pertained to my culture, most notably recordings of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. So I got to hear and love and appreciate. And then many years later, started to collect Negro spirituals. So that's really where the roots of my love of opera began, never knowing that I would ever have a career not only directing opera all over the world, but then writing one myself and appearing in Amsterdam, Blue, in its European premiere.
Even now when it's over Zoom. Well, that's a wonderful story. It really sounds like a Charles Dickens story almost. And I think that's a nice little bridge to my next question, because I think the audience would really love to hear something more about Blue, the opera. What inspired you to make this piece?
Well, Janine Tesori, the composer, who's had an incredible, still has a wonderful career. In fact, a couple of days ago, last Thursday, her new musical opened on Broadway to the most unbelievable reviews. It's called Kimberly Akimbo. All 13 critics said it's the best musical in years, and she's really outdone herself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She was approached by the artistic director of Glimmerglass Festival, a fairly well-known festival in the States. And she was approached by the artistic director to not to write something, but to compose something that had to do with the state of the social or political climate in America. And I was approached on the other end by the artistic director with a list of names that could be possible librettists. And I said, after looking at these names, some of them well-known, I said, what about me?
Bold move.
So the question back to me was, you've never written a libretto. And that's true. I've written plays. So I said, I know exactly what I would want to write about. And I would like to enter my name and send an outline to Janine Tesori. I knew, this was in 2015, I knew that what I needed to write, what I was obsessed to write about, which I felt the need, the necessity to write about, was the continuous list of unarmed Black men, Black boys, Black girls, Black women who were shot, who were unarmed, and who were shot by white police officers. And it was just a catalog of names, name after name, day after day, week, month, year after year.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying for me as a Black man living in America, because I felt I was also a moving target. And I think Kenneth can also attest that we've had big and small, pinpricks, cuts, paper cuts of intrusions and assaults of varying degrees by police officers. As a Black man in America, you've had something. Mm-hmm. It could be just, innocuous to them. Who are you? What are you doing here? Or can I see some ID? Or just being followed or suspiciously looked at. And I knew that I had to write something. So I wrote an outline. Janine Tesori liked it a lot. And then she asked to meet with me. And that's how it began. I had to answer this call through art, through music, through opera in particular, about how I was feeling as a Black man living in America and witnessing and reading and hearing about and seeing what was going on in my country. And this was before George Floyd. The opera premiered before the infamous George Floyd that the whole world experienced. And I know, and every Black man or woman living in America knows, that what happened to George Floyd is not, yes, it was earth-shattering, but it was something that has happened over and over and over through the decades. Yeah. But now the world saw, the world knew.
Kenneth, I just want to come back to you for a second, because I read somewhere that that your role in Blue, that you really saw that as a game changer, and that you even thought about quitting before signing on to do the show.
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, I'd started building my career doing a lot of the traditional roles. And I describe that as often being a guest in this white world, I was often portraying, white kings or gods or people who weren't a part of my lineage or my culture or my history. And I was watching, Black bodies being murdered every day on TV. And opera became a privilege. It felt like a privilege for me to be traveling the world and doing all of this fun stuff when Black bodies were being murdered in the streets. And opera wasn't providing me an outlet for my emotions. It wasn't providing me an outlet for things that I thought was important. And art for me wasn't feeding my soul. So I thought about quitting opera to become a teacher, elementary school teacher. It's the only other thing I've done in my life that is as gratifying as being a singer. I thought about being a social worker or going to law school, something that I could lend my energy to give more of an impact to Black bodies. And then I met Tazewell and Janine, and I learned about subject matter in Blue. And I describe it as, as a lightning bolt hitting me and a sense of purpose hitting me in the art form that I'd built my life around. So Blue became this mission of advocacy for me. It became this vehicle of change for me. And it, at that point, had mirrored my own life. Like, I had just had my first son. I was having these same conversations in the libretto about being fearful of raising a Black boy in America. So it paralleled my life in such a way that I had to do this piece, and I had to give everything that I possibly could as an artist, as a man, as a Black man, as an American, as a Black American to this piece. And I have, and I've given Blue a lot of myself.
And can you explain to us what happens when you perform this role on stage? How does that feel?
It
sounds like a very bodily experience. Obviously, you're singing.
Singing it's a bodily experience, and one of the special things about singing for a singer that it takes all of you, but rarely does it take all of you. If that makes any sense, singing takes all of you. Yeah. In that it's a very physical thing. Your mind has to be sharp. Your emotions, you have to have this access to certain emotions. Blue is different in that it takes all of me. It takes all of my pain as a Black man. It takes all of my culture. It takes all of my knowing like knowing in my bones to do this opera. And with that it becomes something different. You know, it takes my joys, it pulls my pains, it's cathartic, you know, it's fun, you know, that first act, it's a knowing on a different level. So Blue it's different. As a Black artist singing Blue, it's different. And whenever someone new comes to the piece and they leave the piece after Blue feels different. It feels empty to them. And it was very much that way for me because no other piece requires so much of me.
Mm-hmm. And Tazewell, I was wondering, who did you make Blue for? Like, who do you hope sits in the audience every night? Because if I look at, if I look at my own experience, I've been to the opera before, and what I see in that big musical is usually a lot of white people, a lot of elderly white people. No offense to anybody. But I was wondering, who do you hope will come and see the show?
Well, in the first part of your question before you finished it, I wrote this for Kenneth. I knew who was going to play the father because I met him early on. Janine and I met, so I wrote it for him. And it's really his story. It's his journey that we follow. We see the father at the very beginning as a Black man. We don't know who he is. We don't know who he's a police officer. I wanted him to appear on stage as a Black man just with a hoodie, a jacket, high-top sneakers, just walking down the street or sitting on a bench. And that perception of how we see and what we ascribe, what we label, what we pigeonhole, that we brand this Black man standing and looking out at the audience. Who is he? Is he, should we be in fear of him? We don't know underneath this hoodie that he's a police officer, or he could be the president of the United States. The former president, Barack Obama, has described that when he was a community organizer and he was becoming a senator, he was always constantly judged just by the way he dressed. So I wrote it for Kenneth because Kenneth walked into the room, and if you hear that speaking voice, before you hear him sing, you come to attention. Imagine if he was, as he said, he was thinking of becoming a lawyer. I wouldn't want to go opposite or against him. If he was the prosecutor or the defense lawyer and he got up and gave a summation, forget it. I mean, it's over. But thankfully, he became an opera singer. So it's for him first. It is my letter and my gift to a great bass singer who happens to be Kenneth Kellogg, and he has played all productions, and I think it's 5 or 6 in America, and he's now here in Europe. Then, of course, who is it ultimately for? It is for the audience. It is for, yes, it is a story that is from my culture, from my people, set in my neighborhood of Harlem, written about people that I know. The mother-to-be who becomes the mother is someone that I fashioned it after, a woman who lives a couple of blocks away from me and has her own restaurant, a very famous restaurant in Harlem called Melba's. And I see the girlfriends that visit her at the top of the opera are women that I know when I pass their beauty shop or their small business, and I wave, and I've come to know who they are. And so, I know these young ladies who, some of them who have left the neighborhood have gone on to have very incredible careers, very, top-of-the-line careers, running their own businesses in big cities, and some are lawyers and or writers. And then the last thing I ever want to write about was a police officer because of all the interactions that I've had with police officers. I wanted the father becomes the father to be a struggling jazz musician because that's what my father was. And Janine Tesori pointed out, she says, is there any other kind of jazz musician? They're all struggling jazz.
Fair enough.
We don't need to see that story. So I interviewed a couple of police officers, one in Washington, D.C., one in my neighborhood. And I indeed put in not just one police officer, but 4. So when the audience comes in, yes, what we have found in America is that when the word gets out about what this opera, what the story is, knowing nothing about the music, or me, or Janine Tesori, but knowing what the story is, Black audiences have attended, wants to see it, has bought a ticket.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because they know what the story is, and they can't even imagine, that there is an opera about a Black teenager who's shot by white police officers. They can't comprehend what that would be, many of whom are coming to the opera for the first time. So they come in, they know, they think they may know what the story is going to be, and in some cases, they're right. What they're surprised at, I think, and I've heard, is how frank and how honest and how sometimes in your face, but also how funny and how real it is for them. Andy Marie Moore, who plays the mother, said to me at one point, she says, you must have taken a room in my house for months, because this is the reaction that I had when I told my friends and my family who I was going to marry. And this is how some, reacted when they knew I was going to have a baby boy. And she says, just about everything I went through. But for the members of the audiences who are not persons of color, this is for them. This opera is for everyone, because it's a story that while they may not have walked the shoes of this particular family, and they've not had a Black child who was taken away from them at an early age, they are children. They've had a mother and a father. Some of them might be married and they have children. And so I think they can identify with losing a child. What parent wants to lose a child? I don't have children, but I've heard over and over that the worst tragedy that could occur to a parent is that a child dies before they do. Now, that a child is killed while they are alive must be devastating, something that I don't think they ever get over. So there's a long way of my saying this opera is for everyone. And I hope what I found in America is that everyone finds something in this opera that they can identify with. My assistant director here, when I was in Amsterdam, my assistant director, Isabel Sheridan, her husband and her teenage son came to see the opera. She's Caucasian. And she said that the next day over breakfast, they had a wonderful conversation. And her teenage son identified completely with the Black teenage son in the opera, that was the story that gripped him the most. That was the character that he could see himself in the most, by the way he protested and how he felt about his father, who seemed to be of the authoritarian state and who was representing the man, and that he was a young protester and an activist and loved music and poetry and art. So that was very gratifying to me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Before you spoil the rest of the opera, some of them haven't seen it yet. So we're going to make sure that they do. Yeah, sorry, I should have told you before, I think. I would like to thank you so much.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah, sure.
Where am I? What is this place?
I love this reaction.
There's a full audience here.
Yeah, there is a full audience.
Where are you? I mean, it's not your living room, obviously. So where is
Tazewell, you don't know what my living room looks like.
Well, you're right.
It's what I do every Tuesday night. I will tell you afterwards. We have a very full schedule, but I will email you, and we can talk about show later.
Thank you. All right.
Not trying to blow you up, but I have 2 more guests that I want to talk to. I would want to thank you for being here. Although you don't know where you are, we know where we are. Thank you so much for being here, Tazewell Thompson. Thank you for sharing your visions. Give him a hand of applause, guys.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the evening, whatever it is and wherever it is. You are in a city that I've grown to love. And thank you all, everybody. Take care. Hello, Mr. Kenneth Kellogg.
Hello. Bye.
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 I think that's the most wonderful response I've ever gotten over Zoom. Hey, but without further ado, it is my pleasure to announce the next guests. I would like to invite Marcus de Sando and Bart Krieger to join us. Come up, guys. Give them a hand of applause. Bart Krieger is an art historian, curator, critic, writer. Bart also co-curated the wonderful exhibition Surinaamse School at Stedelijk Museum, just around the corner here. And he's currently working as a guest curator at het Suriname Museum, which will open in 2023.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And then on my left, we have Marcus de Sando, the fairly new director of the Prins Claus Fonds. Before that, you were also head of the opera in Johannesburg, and you even started out as a professional opera singer yourself.
Correct.
Correct?
Yeah, correct.
Good. I always like to check that with my guests, whether I introduce them correctly. Welcome. You guys watched the opera, and I was just very curious. What did you think? Any hot takes?
I think for me the most important take out of the opera is the fact that there was honesty that was delivered on stage, and also reminding ourselves that even though it is really kind of a novelty in Europe to see such honesty in terms of a story, but it really isn't, because in essence opera in its history had been contemporary. It is only because of where we live that we work with productions that are 300, 400 years old that we think it's really old and it's classical, but in those times it was really contemporary. So it's wonderful to see that there are contemporary stories that are told in our stages today, and that makes opera relevant, it makes it exciting, it makes it much more important for us to keep pursuing it. So for me, it's really kind of an intellectual level of it. And I'm a director, so we are much more critical. We do a lot, but for me, the essence of what the opera really represents was the most important thing for me that I took out of it.
Yeah. And what about you, Bart?
Yeah, what about me?
Yeah, tell me.
I'm not a frequent visitor of operas, but I loved this one. It was really amazing to see an all-black cast. It's really powerful just to see that. Also the
conductor.
The conductor, a black conductor, and an almost all-white orchestra. Only that is amazing to see. That says so much already.
And is there any scenes, you can also answer to this, Kenneth, that you find remarkably touching or exciting? Is there anything?
Oh my God, the scene between the father and the priest. I mean, besides the fact that he was such an amazing singer, but it was reminiscent of Don Carlo, of the, of course. Yeah, right. It was really
just for the opera insiders. I don't know who these people are, but
it was really incredibly written that you had two voices that are not so different from each other in terms of the timbres and where they sit, but that it was written in the most purely operatic way that you could ever imagine. Yeah. And that after that I was like, okay, now I can go home.
Nah.
Yeah.
This is a really advanced conversation here.
I know.
This is really advanced.
Just keep looking at me.
Right.
We don't get it. No, but for the audience who hasn't seen it, go check it out.
And no spoiler alerts, but it goes right through your heart. This performance, and it's opera. opera, but it could have been a book, it could have been a play, it could have been anything.
The libretto alone it's absolutely stunning.
And I applaud the one that wrote the libretto because of the honesty, but also the humor.
Yeah.
You know, and there's also a difference between white humor and black humor, and you could also see that. And some of it was lost in translation, I found. I don't know who did the Dutch translation, but if you talk about the hoodie and stuff, you can't translate it to capuchon in Dutch, because then it's...
Okay, now we're going into specifics, I think. Guys, let's rein it in a little bit. Marcus, I was just wondering, you grew up in South Africa, where you also trained to be an opera singer. I just talked to Kenneth about that as well, being a person of color in the opera world. How was that for you growing up and developing your skill?
I'm going to keep it very short, because I think it's a very long story. For all of us, it's really quite a long story.
Everybody has long stories.
Very long stories. But I've been very fortunate in the sense that I've grown up in both sides of the coin of the opera world in South Africa. I started singing at a very young age of 13. I started singing opera at 13. And it was because I grew up in a very musical family, that we sang quite regularly at home, preparing for church on Sundays. I sang in youth choirs and, in adult choirs. I was always the youngest person in almost everywhere, in every group that sang in South Africa, and in particularly my area. And then I discovered that there was something called opera through my uncle, who was also singing in another choir, that they had an opportunity to do a showboat because Showboat has a black cast and a white cast, and it was one of the first operas that were done at the State Theatre in Pretoria when it opened, and they did that, and they did Aida, so they Showboat and Aida, so they needed the black cast, and his choir was one of the choirs that were asked to come and sing, because at the time there were not a lot of black opera singers in South Africa, because, as you know, apartheid didn't allow any of us to really, let alone not being able to see productions. We were not even allowed on stage unless you were a hand. And so when I discovered there was this opera thing, and I don't want to really kind of like burst your bubble, but I didn't do it because I loved it.
Why did you do it?
I did it because I could get paid. And growing up poor, you find every means possible to make a living for yourself when you're very young, and your family cannot, buy you those things let alone just the trinkets, but clothes, right? So you think, oh, I can actually do this. They pay. It was a lot of money at the time that they paid per rehearsal. And so I joined the opera company. I auditioned, and I was accepted at 16 years old. So I became professional at 16. And I did it purely because I needed to get out of poverty.
Yeah.
You're one of the first people I've heard say they did music for money.
Yeah. True. But the thing about it is that we always try and romanticize the reason why we sing. Yes, we're very good. Black people have amazing voices. I come from a country that has impeccable instruments. But it was really that kind of survival for me. But once I got in it and I got bitten. I mean, the first opera I ever watched was Turn of the Screw by Benjamin Britten. And I still went back. And the first opera I ever performed in was Lohengrin, Wagner, at 16, and I still went back. So there's definitely something to be said about it. But while I was in it, I really started embodying what opera is about, because I really love storytelling. I love being part of something that excites human beings. Because at heart, I've always believed I should have been a teacher.
Another teacher.
Yeah, because I loved. Today we use the word development, but I loved training. I loved getting other people to do better than what they had done.
It's that connection on another level.
Yeah, right? Because it's not your own achievement that's important, it's seeing them doing it. So that's where it started. Yeah. And from then on, I went on to becoming a soloist, and the director and an administrator.
You did the whole shebang.
I worked from backstage all the way up to actually running an opera company. So, yeah.
Cheers to you. Yeah, I was just wondering because you both have different stories coming where you come from, and obviously you managed to be the director of a big opera house. You have a lead in a wonderful opera touring the world. But in general, how accessible is the opera world for Black people and people of color? What do you think?
I think when I started my response with, I'm very fortunate that I lived in both sides of the coin, right? Where in South Africa, when I started at that age, I was very young, I was very precarious. I didn't care what people thought. I barged into the doors. But it was, we were, at the time that I started as a professional singer, we were only 5 Black people in the whole country who were professional opera singers. And you lived in that world. So, what he's experiencing about being the only one, or, the difference for us that you all had to work that much harder because, it was a world that wasn't created by you, it wasn't for you. Exactly. But then we had incredible revolutionaries in South Africa in terms of opera that in 1994, when we got independence, or rather democracy, I have a different experience than yours, that for me, there was a very definite concerted effort to change the face of opera from being a 99% white to being 99% Black. Wow. In terms of performers, in terms of people that are creatives, and we got it right. So for me, I'm
still working on that in the States.
I know, right?
Maybe you can exchange tips afterwards.
Yeah.
You know what it is?
What is
it's really gatekeepers making a decision that they have to do things differently. That is really what it's about.
A concentrated effort, too.
That's a good word, gatekeepers. That's key.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. So that is so I come from a world where opera is sung mostly by Black people. Mm-hmm. And new operas are being created quite regularly.
Is that due to the population, or is that due to the popularity?
I think because of it's a very important one. Population-wise, yes, we are 80% Black people in South Africa, but the opera world had never been for Black people or by Black people. So that is still, people that really run the major opera companies are still not Black. Mm-hmm. So there's still that needs to be ironed out. But the performers themselves have been transformed in the most beautiful way, I think.
Yeah. I also want to get to you, Bart, because obviously, as we have established, we are the opera noobs in this conversation. But you are here talking from an art world perspective. Obviously, within the art world, representation is not always as self-evident as we would like it to be. How do you listen to these stories, and how do you connect them to your own experience being a person of color within a predominantly white
this is happening everywhere in all the media, of course. You can, right away translate it to any other. What I do find is that the podiumkunsten, so the arts on stage, are much more developed and much more further in their search for diversity and inclusion, because inclusion is what's not happening yet still. Inclusion has to do with the gatekeepers and with the people that decide and choose. And, that's important because it looks diverse sometimes. But then, if you scratch the surface, you find a sea of whiteness.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. That inclusivity. You can have a cast full of Black people, but if the director is white, so it often happens when you're doing a show, Porgy and Bess is just the obvious. You'll have a cast full of Black people, and you have a white director telling Black people how to act Black, which is really, it's
cringy.
It's such a bizarre world.
And it's almost 90%. That's
exactly.
90% of the time, Porgy and Bess is directed by white people.
Yeah.
But that's a microcosm of the bigger problem in opera.
Because if we look at the idea of diversifying and inclusivity, do you think that there is an inherent motivation to really make space for diverse narratives and a more diverse cast or directors, or do you think it's also maybe little bit of a box we need to tick off sometimes, or maybe even some form of tokenism.
If I have to speak from a point of view of an administrator, there is a very fine line in making those decisions, because again, you have to consider the people that are buying the tickets to come and see the show. And if predominantly they are not of the same color that they saw on stage. I remember when we did Madame Butterfly in Cape Town, I can't remember the year, but I was singing Goro, and obviously being a black person playing a Japanese, and we had, I think the only person who was white in the production was the Madame Butterfly herself, and the whole cast was, there were people who were writing letters to the newspapers complaining that the production is not representative of them, right? So as an administrator, you have to always be very careful how you balance the two. And I'll tell you the flip coin of it was when I took over as CEO of Gauteng Opera in 2003, we lost more sponsors than gained in a black-run country.
Wow.
Because immediately the people that control the purses are not black. So you have to be very careful how you balance the two, and it's never an easy one. So, I mean, whether someone puts on a production or not, it's never an easy one.
That's exactly the same with museums. They have an audience to consider, they have artists to consider, but they are getting sponsored by people that are white predominantly, you know? So that's a struggle for them, because they exist because of the sponsors, you know?
And he who controls the purse controls the fate of the company and what's put on stage. Which is, I mean, we talked about that cyclical problem. How do you decide to, appease who's paying the money? How do you promote diversity when this person doesn't want diversity? I mean, you end up in a bizarre conundrum of
a lot of different balls to juggle. But
I mean, it takes those people who put on a blue to challenge that system and produce something that speaks to the heart of people and can do both. It doesn't have to be divisive.
As mentioned by Tazewell as well. I think it's also a nice bridge to you again, Bart, because you put on a wonderful exhibition, Surinaamse School at Stedelijk Museum, which is one of the most important institutes for modern art here in the Netherlands. Could you tell us a little bit about that exhibition? Because that's also quite unique.
I didn't curate it by myself.
You
I was part of a team. Also, the Black Archives were involved. Those are really activists for everything and everyone in the Netherlands to fight for more inclusion. It was wonderful. It was a time between the old director and the new director. So there was space created by curators to give different voices the stage. And that is what happened. So, we say it's stadhouderloze tijdperk because there was no ruler. There was much more freedom, and we took it. And
without the gatekeeper, you mean?
The gatekeeper in this, without the gatekeeper, but there was also another gatekeeper who was Claire van Els. She's one of the curators there, and she opened up for all the other different voices to empower this exhibition. And it was a dream job. Look at the images.
Because what did you put in the exhibition? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, it was 100 years of fine arts. So paintings
from Suriname,
from Surinamese artists, and they're not only black. There's also a huge Asian diaspora. So people from Indonesia, India. So it's very diverse, and it's wonderful to see, and it's so rich. It's like a buffet of international cuisine, and that's what we did in the Stedelijk Museum.
And because you said there was already space you could slip the exhibition into. Before that, did you think it would have been harder before to curate something like that?
Yeah, there's a couple of problems with this. On one hand, I'm an art historian, just like the curators that are white that are have a job at the museum. So why do they have a job? Why don't I have a job? And why can't I only curate shows of Sudanese art? Why would that be? Yeah. Why don't I do Impressionisme, Germany, or the French, Gauguin? Why don't they ask me? I don't have to dream about that. That's not going to happen. So it's really a different position. And I wrote an essay on this because I felt there's a lot of powers at work to keep people out, to have it not inclusive.
To keep them especially out of the positions of power.
Exactly. And they do it with seemingly innocent things like less is more. For me, please bear with me. For me, that's the apartheid in the art world. Yeah. You know, it's you do too much, or you have more talent than me. That's the point. So less is more. Tone down. You know, and that's what I feel is happening. You know, and of the paper cuts they were told, those are the paper cuts that keep us out.
Yeah, is it recognizable for you guys?
Absolutely. I was just going to ask, do you feel like they think that's all that you're good at? Do they recognize that you can do those other things?
I think before I mentioned it, they didn't realize it even. Yeah. That's what I think. That's not the way they think.
It's very institutionalized in the way we think.
I've been a part of some productions where I've gone to a new city and a guest who's worked with me in another city has come to see me in a show. And one of the responses was like, "Oh, Ken, I didn't know you could do that." It's like, wow. I work with your company all the time. How do you not know I could do that? But it's just that perception because of my race. They think of my capabilities and my abilities in a certain way. So they don't think I sing Giovanni as well as a white colleague. So they won't cast me as that. And that's how the system is.
We were having a conversation about something similar, that I worked with someone from America who passed away quite a number of years back, who was an incredible tenor, and I was astounded by the fact that he could sing Don José as arias, and as a director already at the time I would have cast him as a Don José, but he never got it. The only biggest role he ever sang was Pang in Turandot. Oh.
Is that a small role? Please.
It's kind of, for a voice like that,
compared to Don José.
Yeah, right. And it's exactly the same thing, that people didn't see beyond the color. They derived their capabilities based on the color that they. But I must also add that coming from a predominantly black country, it doesn't mean that is any different. Because even in South Africa, with as much as we have black talent, most leading roles were always imported for a very long time, because they never felt that there was black people, And my mentor was incredible in changing that perception, where he started, pushing a lot of young singers in doing some of these big roles to prove a point. And that's why we have the Pretty Endes, the Pumeza Machikizas, that's why we have all these amazing South African singers now that are really gracing the whole world, is because of, the gentleman that said, I'm going to change this perception. Yeah. So what I wanted to say was, the only way to change this is a decision. Yeah. It's purely a decision.
A decision, and it's also democracy. Why is there one curator, and that's white, and why are the others being flown in for a period of time and then they're gone? I call it the one-night stands of the museum world, which is not fair. Yeah. It's not fair.
We want a committed relationship right now.
Exactly.
Yeah. No. Obviously, as you said, it takes those people with guts to make a change, to make the right decision. And I was also wondering, you guys all being opinionated and active within the opera world and within the art world, to what extent do you feel a responsibility to be an advocate for change or for diversity?
Well, my work is about advocacy. Being currently now an executive director of a development organization means that my mandate is around advocating for the cultural space. The one thing that you had no choice about from where I come from is that as soon as you assume a role of power in any organization, in any type of discipline, you immediately take on the responsibility of advocating for inclusivity, and in particular, not even just inclusivity, but the word I always want to say is plurality.
Plurality.
Because we have to embrace the fact that we are more than just one entity. And once you take that on, it is the responsibility of an administrator. You have no choice to the matter. And so that's why I keep saying it's a decision. And I think that the world right now is, as we know, as we've seen, that politically there's a lot of polarization that is happening all over again, which means that the cultural space has a much bigger role to play in trying to highlight the possibilities of a world that is much better than what we are moving towards. That means that the work that you do as, for me, in my case, as a director of a development organization, is that I need to be able to highlight the importance of not being didactic around how people have to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Kenneth? What do you think?
I mean, I think it's become a mission for me. Since being involved in Blue, I've been able to reach a broader audience who listen to me on a different level because of what Blue has done for them. And how it's touched them. So they're more apt to listen to me since I've taken on this role. So I have no problem calling up an administrator. It's like, you're doing this wrong, or you're doing that wrong. How about you thinking about it this way? For me, as an artist, I hope to get, or I plan on getting to that administrator position at some point, but I'm a huge advocate in artists owning their voices. At this stage in my career, solely being an artist, often companies see us as just that. We are a piece of the puzzle. And we don't recognize that we're the face of the company. People are coming to see us. Yeah. Our faces are on the posters. There's a certain level of power that comes with that we don't often recognize. And I've been able to find my voice in that lane. And I'm a huge advocate in artists speaking up for themselves.
Here.
Yeah,
Bart?
I think there's polarization, but there's also how do you say coming together. With the Black Lives Matter movement, everybody found out they're not alone. Yeah. It was huge. It's like, oh my God, other people think this, and we demonstrated. I don't call myself an activist, but I was. Walking in the protest with everybody else, and I think all of us are being activists or being more activistic lately, and it's not about I think the individuals, but it's about the wave. We're part of the wave. It's huge, and what I think is important now is to consolidate in institutions, Black institutions. Like the Museum of Suriname, which my father is from. He's from Suriname. That's my Caribbean background, which is very important because if the wave goes lower, then you still have those anchor points because the next wave will then go further. Yeah, that's how you build up the momentum. Black Archives is also a good example of that.
They're amazing.
Etc. etc.
Yeah.
I just want to remind us that we are talking about institutionalization that has happened over hundreds and hundreds of years, and that we want to make a change at a very short space of time. That the last 100 years have been crazy for us as humans. We've developed so much faster than I think we should have. That's why we have climate change issues right now. But we also, the advocacy is around reminding Black creatives in general that they are just as good as, but it will take years because it has taken years to get us to this point. So it's about reminding ourselves about the power. What you're talking about, it's about saying that you are not any different. I'm sitting here as a black director of a development organization in the Netherlands who is from South Africa. It is in itself, I mean, I applaud my board. I think they're very brave, but I also thought at the same time that it was a great challenge because it meant that there was already individuals in the world that are willing to see beyond color on what the capabilities of a human being are, and that's already a picture that one can embrace. That that the world is changing, but again, it's again about decisions. It's about very deliberate decisions that we're taking, but it's about taking. When was slavery abolished in Suriname? It's not so long ago, right?
No.
And so, it's taking on all those years and flipping it around. So as much as we want things to be done quickly, we have to at the same time also be a little bit patient with ourselves.
It's so hard.
Not with of course it is,
that's
right?
hard.
It is.
It's hard.
I mean, especially the younger generation who want immediate.
Yeah, they're very immediate, yeah. No.
And I understand their fight because we've been told it takes a long time.
Yeah.
We've been told that forever, and still nothing has.
Yeah. What do you say to them, though? To all the young artists who are like, this is my time. I want space now.
Well, they speak up. They must speak up, which is really fantastic. I mean, we work with a lot of young artists now, a lot of young creatives, and what is beautiful about them is that they don't ask for permission.
No.
And that's great.
And they don't wait.
No, they don't. And they don't even want you to grant them permission. So we are developing a young generation which is a little bit more fearless than some of us are, but institutionally it will take probably another 100 years. But in terms of the activism itself, it's going to move much quicker.
Fearlessness, I love that one. It also has to do with different ways to get somewhere. So there's also a certain, you can rely on this thing happening because we're not starting it. We're on shoulders of giants.
Exactly.
So we can have that rest and let the young activists do it now and right away and see what that evolves then.
But I think it takes that youthful energy. I think it takes that fearlessness. I think it takes that dedication to whatever you're trying to change. You have to be really dedicated. You can't call for change just to call for change. If you're not willing to do the work, you're not willing to get your hands dirty, and you don't know the craft. There are a lot of people calling for change who, one, haven't dedicated themselves, speaking of opera, haven't dedicated themselves to the art form in a way that they can get up there and stand up and doing what they're asking to be done. And it's difficult for such an institution who's so ingrained in history, so ingrained in these years of cultural standing, to trust an entity who's saying change, but I can't do it for you. Yeah. So there's several artists who I know who have dedicated themselves to this art form in a way that they can get up there and do what they're asking. And I think it takes that radical energy, that radical spirit, and that fight and that dedication to the craft to make that change. Because we're standing around waiting. So we're asking for change from white people still in position. We often find ourselves asking white people for permission to change something. And that's really difficult for a young person of color to take.
I see it as one medal. One side is activism, and the other side...
Two sides of the coin.
And the other side is building bridges. With Black Lives Matter, all the statues fell off their base. They were torn down. I could never do that as an art historian, but I can tell you who we need to put up there next.
Yeah.
So that's how they work together, I think.
Absolutely.
But it's also a responsibility of the institutions to make the bridging of those bridges, a lot smoother, because you cannot expect people that do not have the resources or even most times the agency to make a difference when we sit in positions where we have access. And not just resource access, but we have access to individuals that can, again, those gatekeepers, and we able to. So institutions have to carry a bigger role, and I think that's why it's applaudable for the National Opera and Ballet to actually put on a production, which in a lot of ways has very little. I mean, we can try and rationalize it as much as one. It's an American story.
Yeah.
It's a contemporary American story, and to bring that production here to encourage this kind of conversation, it already means that you have individuals that are at least opening a door a little bit to saying, how do we bridge those gaps? Yeah.
But if you listen to Sophie talk about it, she talks about taking the risk to be the first one.
Yeah.
Sophie,
to
the
do
director
Blue.
of...
The director of,
yeah.
She talks about, jumping on that ledge and being the first company to do it in Europe. And I think that's really important.
That's it.
I think that's what it takes.
Well, I hope that many will follow. I think we're drawing to a very natural close of the evening.
Like 5 minutes.
We can talk more at the bar. Don't worry about that. But before we end this evening, are you guys optimistic when it comes to inclusion? Because you think it will happen, right? That opera will become more inclusive.
Yeah.
You really have to just look at me, a South African boy who started off purely wanting to survive, made a name for himself in opera, became an opera director, became an opera administrator, became a development director, running a development agent in South Africa, and now running a development agent in the Netherlands.
Yeah, you're a beautiful example of that, but you are still one boy from South Africa.
No, it's the one that we see.
Yeah.
Because remember, the world is really much larger than what we think it might be. Yes, social media makes us think that it's really small, but it isn't. There's a lot of work that's been done by certain individuals globally that are making sure that change happens. So hope is every day. That's what wakes me up every morning to go to work, and we meet the most amazing beneficiaries at the Prince Class Fund that are already changing lives of individuals in their own context. How do you then not have faith and hope? Because that generation shows you that it is possible.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that takes time. Seeing it, because there's so much that's being done that's not seen. I think seeing it is what takes the time.
Yeah, but it's there. We just don't see it.
Yeah.
It's there, and it's a whole wave. Things are moving. Also, if you look at Netflix, you see that the imagery is changing. It's not a white hero and a white heroine. Nowadays, you have Asians playing the lead.
Yeah.
You're like, oh my God, are there Asians acting? Yes, there are Asians,
Who
and
knew?
not just in Miss Saigon or doing naughty stuff, but they can be interesting and full characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like we have to think as a child, but we're reteaching ourselves how things should look. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a wonderful, positive note to end on. Thank you so much. But before we are closing this night, this is my favorite part. We are going to listen to some music performed by Kenneth Kellogg, obviously, as we have him here, and accompanied by Irina Sisoyeva on the piano. Give them a warm hand of applause.
Stay alive. That's what you're supposed to do. You are black boy, a walking, moving target. A black boy. Take off the hoodie, 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 the hoodie. Son, the light is turning amber. Run across the street. No, don't run, walk. Don't walk, walk, don't walk, don't walk. Walk, don't wear your ball cap backwards. Don't wear a hoodie. Don't carry shiny objects. Don't get a tattoo. Don't pierce your ears. Don't shave your head. Don't get an afro. Don't make a fist. Don't sit on the curb. Don't sit on the hood of a car. Don't wear cornrows. Don't look the man in the eye. Look the man in the eye. Don't make quick movements. Don't put your hands in your pockets. Don't remove your shirt. Don't lie on the grass. Don't wear sunglasses. Don't spit. Don't chew. Don't laugh. Don't bounce. Have a photo ID. Have a driver's license. Social security card. Voter registration passport. Dog tag. Library card. Don't run. Don't run. Don't run. You are black, boy. The hoodie. The hoodie.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. It was beautiful on stage. It was beautiful here. Then there's nothing left for me but to close this evening. Please go and enjoy this wonderful opera if you haven't yet. It's still playing on Thursday the 17th, Sunday the 20th, and Tuesday the 22nd of November. I would like to thank my guests, Tazewell Thompson, Kenneth Kellogg, Marcus Desando, Bart Krieger, and obviously Irina Sisoyeva on the piano. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Until next time.